mysterious. All right, everybody. I hope you're ready. We have 2 fresh Bigfoot sightings coming right up. One from Washington State and one from Louisiana. Buckle up your seatbelts. Smack that subscribe button with a 10-pound hammer if you haven't already. I do appreciate it. And let's jump right into today's Bigfoot encounters. Oh yeah, and I always love it when you let me know where you're listening from. Drop it down in the comments. Where are you at in the world? Well, I appreciate y'all. Let's get into today's Bigfoot sightings. First one comes to us from George. I'm retired now, and I've been a cross-country runner since my days in high school track. Looking back on my life, I've been running for well over 45 years and counting. And I've been living in Washington State for almost 12 years now. When this sighting occurred, it was the summer of 2014. I cannot tell you how many miles I have logged, but there is no shortage of beautiful trails to get lost on in my area and around the state. I had run this particular trail so many times that I lost count. Truth be told, I don't really think I ever started to count. I always leave and finish early in the day. Many of the easier trails to run on can somewhat be crowded during the day, and I try to avoid that at all cost. I found myself coming up this grade at a fairly steady trot. Where the trail's fairly narrow, the trail at this point appears as though it was formed more by erosion than anything having to do with man. It's somewhat of an elevated area with many large rocks covered in moss protruding from the side of the trail and within the trail itself. It very well may be that this trail was actually constructed many years ago in this fashion, but I have no knowledge of that being the case. To my right side, as I was running, the grade of the hill goes up rather steeply and is literally covered with everything from trees to ferns and anything in between. To my left-hand side, the hill was falling away from the trail at a lesser grade, with more of the same type of forestation being visible. Ahead of me on this segment of trail, I could see relatively far, to the extent of, say, 200 feet or better. It was mainly to my right-hand side that visibility was really hindered by the growth. As I ran, there were 2 large trees growing alongside the trail, next to each other, maybe a foot wide. It was then that, unexpectedly, a large brown Sasquatch came marching out from behind these 2 trees, stepping directly across the trail in a singular, long bound, and continuing down the woods on my left side. It was walking, but moving so fast that I couldn't have caught it on my best day running. As I said before, this trail here looked like it was formed by erosion. There was about a 3-foot tall worn edge on the right side, and off to the left, there was an equally deep drop-off, which was also about 3 feet. The Sasquatch was walking down a steep slope, and quickly, with one long step, it had descended some 6 feet in elevation, and perhaps 12 feet or more in length, crossing the trail and ending up on the descending slope. I stopped dead in my tracks. It seemed as though, in a matter of seconds, it was down the slope 100 yards and gone from sight. I moved up alongside of the trees that it had walked behind because I had seen its head pass above a broken branch in one tree. I stepped up and held onto the tree in an effort to judge its height. I'm 5'10". With my arm fully extended, I was a good 3 feet short of the mark. The worn part of the trail was about 2 feet wide, and when he stepped over it, which happened very quickly, it appeared like its foot was almost as wide as the trail when in the air. The hair on its head looked like an old Rod Stewart haircut. It was long and shaggy, hiding any details of its head from my view. And I can state this emphatically that when this beast walked by, there was an instantaneous stench in the air of something like fresh manure, and it was nauseating, and it lingered for several minutes after he'd passed. The most amazing thing was the ease with which it made this long and downward stride without so much as a hitch in its step. You or I would have to leap with all of our might and more. We would have ended up with a broken ankle or worse. It had to have weighed 1,000 pounds, and it came down the hill like it was floating on air. It was absolutely remarkable to see in every sense of the word. And that's where George's story comes to a close, guys. Interesting. Yeah, some of these sightings are just short and sweet. I love it. Well, let me sip my coffee here and we'll move on to the next one. This one comes to us from someone named Terry. This was back in 1979. He's from Louisiana. 2 years prior to the day of this sighting, I had met my wife-to-be at Lockland Air Force Base in San Antonio, Texas. Mary Beth and I had both signed up for the Air National Guard from 2 different points of the compass, and had first met in a Sunday church service on the base. It was love at first sight for both of us. We'd actually only saw each other a handful of times while on the base, and then I headed back north and she headed back to Louisiana, her home state. We stayed in touch, and I'd made several trips down to her home, where on the last trip I'd proposed to her and she said yes. Speaking for myself, I had no real anchor around my leg keeping me in Pennsylvania. She, on the other hand, had an extensive family, and a little girl she had out of wedlock when she was 15. The family was really tight, and the mother and grandma looked after little Julia while Mary Beth was doing the guard thing. I decided to move down south and make a go of it locally. Anywhere that Mary Beth was, I was happy to be. Things were working out really well. I had scored a job with a local utility company that actually paid really decent compared to the going wages in the area. According to what I was used to, this was a depressed area, but the people didn't even know it, and they were happy. I'm sure there's more than one life lesson wrapped up in that statement somewhere. At any rate, their family had several homes scattered in a small area, and all of them were built on stilts in case of flooding. The reason I'd mention this will come into play later. Mary Beth, Julia, and I had taken over one of the homes as our own, which was really gracious of the family. There was 0 mortgage, 0 rent, which was quite a way to start off a marriage. Now, the stilts in this house were about 6 feet tall, and there was a well-built staircase that came up alongside the house, which brought you right into the kitchen, facing the front room of the house, and there were 2 rooms side by side with a half wall dividing them. The room to the left was the dining room, which was connected to the kitchen by a pass-through window for serving food, and the room on the right was a den. Both the dining room and the den had a large picture window on the front wall of the house that actually faced the road. There were houses across the street from us, as well as on both sides, and the rear of the house was dense forest that became real boggy as you walked into it. I was told by some of the family and the locals that there was SHIT in those woods you don't want to meet up with, even when the sun was shining. I had taken the message at that time with a grain of salt, knowing that these folk were a little bit different than I had been accustomed to in the way that they lived and the things that they said. The three of us were in this house for several months, and on more than one occasion, Julia had called for Mary Beth during the night. On several of these nights, Julia had come to sleep with us. When I asked her what she saw, she said a big dog. When I asked her what she meant, she said a big dog was smiling at her through the window and she didn't like him. As I said, the same thing had occurred a number of nights, spaced out over several months. So it wasn't like every night she wanted to sleep with us. Now, this house was built on a lot that had an angled grade to it. The side of the house that Julia's bedroom was on only had about a 4-foot stilt exposed, whereas the other side of the house, there was a full 6 feet of exposed timber. I don't know why, but one day I was out next to the house and I grabbed a 5-foot-long rake and held the rake up to the house under Julia's bedroom window. As a rough estimate, it was about 7 feet or so to the bottom of her window and about 10 to the top. I remember chuckling to myself and saying, "Now that's a serious dog," and I blew it off. I remember the day as if it was yesterday. Being the 9th of October, Mary Beth was in the kitchen baking some corn muffins while Julie and I were in the den. I was sitting in the easy chair, watching the tube, and Julia was playing with some toys on the floor in front of me. I must remind you that this side of the house was facing the street and not the woods. There was a fierce rainstorm raging outside, and the power had flickered on and off several times. And then it went off for good. We lit some candles, and thankfully Mary Beth didn't lose the muffins because we had gas. It was 7:30 p.m., and the lightning and thunder just started rolling in. It was so loud and frequent that Julia had jumped into my lap. I couldn't blame her, because it was even freaking me out. So much that I was wishing that I could jump into someone else's lap myself. I was looking down at a book with this nice pedestal candle burning next to me. And every time the lightning flashed, the entire picture window in front of me lit up. On one of the flashes, I swore I saw the silhouette of something large in the window, and then it went dark. I was now looking straight at the glass, but it was black. No sooner had my eye got accustomed to the dark than another lightning flash lit up the window, and there it was. The upper body of a large, hairy creature with pointy ears sticking up like a wolf's. I didn't want to scare anybody, but suddenly I was a believer in Julia's story. I told Julia to go in by Mommy because I had to see something, and so she did. I put my face right up against the glass. As I did, I distinctly saw something dart off to the side of the house. I walked down the hall to Julia's window and looked out, but I saw nothing. Mind you, it was very dark and the power was out. I then went to the rear of the house, looking out towards the woods, and saw nothing there as well. At about 10 o'clock, the power came back on and the storm was gone. I told Mary Beth I was going out to the car for my smokes and grabbed a flashlight. I went down the stairs and headed straight for the front of the house to where the window was that I'd seen this creature. I needed some kind of affirmation I wasn't hallucinating or something, but I knew what I had seen, and it wasn't a reflection. As I shone the light around on the ground, there was a number of very large and very long, oddly shaped footprints in the soggy soil. They were very narrow at the heel and very broad at the toes, of which there were 4. That's right. There were 4 toes on each print, and the feet were almost 20 inches long, respectively, being sunk into the ground a good 2 inches. I looked around with the light and saw nothing. It was at this very moment that my neighbor Clyde pulled in with his truck, his house being less than 30 feet away from mine. When he jumped out, he said, "Is everything all right?" I said to him, "You ought to come over here and have a look at this." I told him what had happened. As we both stood there looking at the prints, he said to me, "Sweet Lord baby Jesus, what you've got here, boy, are the footprints of a Rugaru." He said, "I never thought in all my days I would ever set eyes on them, but they're here." I said to him, "What in the hell is a Rugaru?" He told me, "In these parts, it's known as the Wolf Man from Hell, and you sure as hell don't want to mess with them. No way, no how." From what I saw in the lightning flashes, this thing was halfway up the picture window and its shoulders looked to be 4 feet across. I could definitely see tall, pointy ears that stuck straight up, like they were pinned. The weirdest thing were these 4-toed hoof prints that it had left, being under the window. To this day, I never go into the woods behind our home unless I'm armed for bear, or in this case, armed for Rugaru, whichever comes along first. Woo! Well, that would get me. It's like straight out of a horror movie. Man. What do y'all think of that one? You ever seen anything like that? You know anybody that has? Well, if you've had an encounter with a Bigfoot, or a Rugaru in this case, or Dogman, which is another name for the Rugaru, I think, shoot me an email at cryptidmysterious@gmail.com. I'd love to hear about it. Appreciate y'all. Don't be afraid to drop me a like now. I'll see y'all in the next one.